Before Amara, tightly bound to an ancient willow tree in the heart of the Louisiana swamp forest, stood a creature that left her frozen in shock. A pregnant mermaid, her golden scales shimmering like shattered sunlight, her desperate eyes reaching out toward Amara, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Please, save me. If you don't, both I and my child will die." Amara, a poor single mother living in seclusion on the edge of the swamp with her 2 children, had never believed in legends. But in that moment, every old tale from her grandmother, every warning from the villagers about the water spirits, came rushing back to life. She stood at a crossroads, flee, as her instincts urged, or risk everything to untie the ropes binding a mythical creature, a choice that could either save or curse her family forever. And in that very moment, Amara's fate began to shift. All right, my amazing audience, if this story had you holding your breath from the very first seconds, don't hesitate. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you live. Every time I read your messages from all corners of the world, it warms my heart and fuels my inspiration to keep telling fantastical stories like this one. Let's keep the flame of legend burning bright together. Amid the thick, cold fog that cloaked the ancient trees, their branches drooping over the still waters of the Louisiana swamp, stood a dilapidated wooden shack nestled among the reeds and gnarled tree roots. That was where Amara lived, a dark-skinned woman with thick, curly hair, a gaunt face, but eyes that always shone with a spark of resilience. She had nothing but her calloused hands and a heart that knew how to endure. Each day for Amara began before the first crow of the rooster. When the night had not yet lifted, when the frogs still croaked quietly by the water's edge and fireflies flickered among the windless palm fronds, she was already awake, tying a cloth around her waist, placing an old iron pot on her head, and stepping out of the house. She treaded lightly along the narrow path leading into the forest, where a sweet stream wound its way through giant tree roots and dense thickets. That stream was the lifeline she had known her entire life. Amara bent down to collect water as she did every day, steadily, carefully, as if each drop were the lifeblood of this land. She never complained. Returning home, she kindled a fire with dry branches, tossed into the pot a few perch she had caught by hand, added some wild greens growing behind the house, and seasoned it with the fiery, pungent spices from the small garden out back. That steaming, spicy, fragrant gumbo was all she had to feed her 2 children through the day. The villagers often said that if you wanted to know how strong a woman could be, you only needed to look into Amara's eyes as she carried water home through a storm. 6 years ago, her husband, a young sailor who once dreamed of taking her to the horizon beyond the bay, had gone out to sea during a gale and never returned. No one found his body, only a few torn nets that washed ashore and the wedding ring she had worn ever since, still resting on her finger. From that day on, she became both father and mother. The swamp was never an easy place to live, especially for a single woman. But Amara never uttered a word of complaint. She caught fish with her hands, wove baskets to trade for corn, grew onions in rusty tin cans, and taught her children to honor their ancestors each time the sun set. She taught Malik, her older son, how to read the wind, how to listen to the owl's call to predict rain. Zaria, her younger daughter, was taught how to tell healing plants from poisonous ones and how to tie a cloth so the wind wouldn't snatch it away on gusty days. The scattered community sometimes came to her for help, treating snake bites, performing rituals for the dead, or simply hearing a prayer. Amara never turned anyone away. She believed her ancestors were watching over her, through the solitary calls of night birds on dry branches, through the flickering fireflies when she stepped onto the porch in the quiet of the night. One could be poor in money, poor in possessions, but never poor in spirit. That was the lesson Amara silently taught her children every day, not with words, but through the sweat that fell to the ground and the eyes that always looked up when facing hardship. And on a morning that seemed as ordinary as any other, that life quietly veered onto a path no one could have foreseen. That morning began like any other, with fog as thick as smoke and the swamp's water biting cold like needles. But something strange unsettled Amara. The air seemed quieter than usual. No owl's call, no flapping wings of wild ducks, only a thin, dense layer of mist, as if concealing something beneath the ancient trees. Amara decided not to take her usual path. She chose a narrow trail through the wild eastern forest, a place few ventured because of the dense trees, soft ground and frequent snakes. But she knew this route would cut her journey in half, allowing her to return before her two children woke. Her hand gripped the rim of the iron pot balanced on her head, her feet stepping lightly over decaying leaves and gnarled roots. As she neared an ancient willow, its trunk leaning toward the lake as if whispering something to the water, Amara froze. A faint sound, like wind brushing through leaves, yet sharp enough to send a chill down her spine. It wasn't the sound of a forest creature, nor a falling branch. It was a moan, faint, faltering, as if someone was struggling to utter their final words from a distant realm. She set the water pot down, crouched slightly, and listened in silence. The sound came again, clearer this time, as if whispered right by her ear. "Save me." Amara's heart pounded, part fear, part curiosity. Cautiously she stepped toward the back of the willow, where thick ferns obscured her view, and as she parted the leaves, her breath caught in her throat. There, wrapped around the tree, was a creature of breathtaking beauty. She was unlike anything Amara had ever seen. Her skin shimmered with a pearlescent glow, reflecting the dim light like the surface of a lake under a new moon. Her long wet hair cascaded like soft strands of seaweed. Her large eyes, glowing with a mystical golden hue, were filled with both panic and pleading. But what turned Amara to stone was the tail. A long tail, covered in shimmering golden scales, glinting like the sun shattered and scattered across her body. And more than that, she was pregnant. The rounded belly of a woman about to give birth left Amara reeling. Fear surged through her chest like a gust of cold wind. The village legends of water spirits, mermaids who cursed those who dared approach, now stood vivid before her, no longer mere rumours or fireside tales. But she didn't look like a demon. On the contrary, her face was filled with desperation, her lips pale, her body shivering from the cold. Rough forest vines bound her arms and legs tightly, dark streaks of blood seeping onto the ground. In that moment, Amara was no longer just a poor woman living on the edge of the swamp. She was a witness to something miraculous, or perhaps a calamity hidden deep within the forest. And when the mermaid's eyes quietly met Amara's, something silent, unspoken, forged a connection between two beings who seemed worlds apart, and fate began to speak. Amara stood motionless, her heart pounding in her chest, as if it might shatter her ribs. Before her, the strange creature lay, frail and silent like an unfinished curse. The faint light filtering through the swamp's canopy fell upon the mermaid's body, making the golden scales on her tail gleam like flickering fire in the mist. But it wasn't her beauty that stunned Amara. It was the rounded belly, the sign of life forming within a tormented body. A gentle forest breeze brushed against her skin, carrying the musty scent of decaying leaves and the metallic tang of blood. Thorny vines tightly bound the mermaid's hands, shoulders and tail, leaving swollen purple bruises and trickles of blood. Her body trembled with each shiver, her eyes silent with a plea she couldn't voice. Amara wanted to step back. A part of her screamed to leave, to get away as fast as possible. Having lived in the swamp for years, she had heard enough stories about creatures lurking beneath the water's surface. Lost spirits, mermaids who seduced men only to drag them to the cold riverbed. From childhood she had been taught, never touch what doesn't belong to the human world. But there was no curse in those eyes, no threat, no deceit, only exhaustion, panic, and a primal fear. The same look any mother would have, clinging to the last shred of hope for her unborn child. And then another gust of wind brought sounds that turned Amara to stone. Footsteps. And laughter. Low. Harsh. Mingled with the soft lapping of water against the shore. A voice echoed from a distance, broken by the dense trees. It wasn't the sound of herb gatherers or fishermen, it was the voice of heartless men, carrying only nooses and blades in their hands. Amara turned her head, her eyes quickly scanning the thick forest. Her breathing grew rapid. They were coming. There was no choice left. Her hand reached out, trembling but resolute. The thorny vines, tough as iron hooks, tore into her palms. Blood began to seep, staining her skin like red threads connecting two strangers' fates. The knots were tight, each one laced with the cruelty of whoever had bound them. But Amara didn't stop. Her fingers were scratched, her nails broken, yet she persisted, working through each knot. The pain of torn flesh no longer deterred her. Something had shifted within Amara. A spark had ignited deep inside, like a flame flaring up in the midst of cold water. The mermaid said nothing, but in those glistening glass-like eyes, her gaze. It spoke her gratitude, and Amara felt it, though not a single word was uttered. The footsteps grew closer, twigs snapped underfoot. The air grew heavy as if the entire swamp was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. But the vines still held, and Amara still didn't stop. The moment the final knot loosened from the swollen wrists, Amara felt as if the entire forest exhaled a pent-up breath. The vines fell to the ground, heavy as if a sin had just been released from the captive's body. The mermaid curled in on herself, her freed hands limp, too exhausted to lift her own body from the cold, damp earth. And then, a scream pierced the air. From the water's edge, a man's voice, hoarse with rage, tore through the mist. "She's escaped! Someone's helping her!" Amara had no time for fear. Her body reacted before her mind could. Her bloodied hand reached out again, wrapping around the mermaid's back, pulling her up. The long, slick tail, like seawater, slid over Amara's shoulder, heavy as if carrying an entire ocean. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her feet sank into the soft earth, but she didn't step back. Carrying the creature on her back, Amara stumbled through the ferns growing close to the ground. Wet leaves brushed her face, gnarled roots tore at her cloth, but she didn't stop. The mermaid's faint breath grazed the back of her neck, fragile as a final exhale. The cold tail brushed against her waist, leaving a slick trail like night dew on her skin. But Amara kept moving, each step trembling and reckless, deeper into the heart of the forest. The sound of the hunter's footsteps echoed close behind. She heard the distinct click of a gun being cocked, the crunch of branches under heavy boots. Amara's heart pounded like a war drum, and her legs began to betray her, trembling with each step. They veered toward a shallow creek, and suddenly, Amara froze. Ahead, a massive, dark-scaled figure blocked the path. It was a fully grown swamp alligator, its body long and thick like a dark log, its half-closed eyes glinting orange like ghostly embers. Its wide snout, lined with jagged teeth, parted slowly as if weighing whether to make them its breakfast. Amara stood rigid. There was no way around, no time to turn back. They were trapped. But then the mermaid, slumped on her back, lifted her head slightly, her lips moving. It wasn't human speech, nor a cry. It was a series of strange, deep and smooth sounds, like water dripping onto stone. Soft, ancient, almost sacred. The alligator raised its head, its ears attuned. Amara could sense an invisible connection between the two creatures. Something that needed no explanation. Then, ever so slowly, the alligator turned, silently sinking into the mud, leaving behind only rippling water and a few bubbles spreading across the surface. The path was clear. Amara didn't believe in miracles, but in that moment, she didn't need to. The life resting on her back had spoken for itself. Without looking back, Amara ran on, her feet treading through the mud left by the alligator. The mermaid slumped against her shoulder, her frail fingers clutching the edge of Amara's shirt as if clinging to her last thread of life. If this story leaves you speechless or smiling in silence, let us know where you're listening from. The world is vast, but every share, every subscription, makes it feel closer. And who knows, the next story might just begin right where you stand, the shack of Amara nestled under the shadow of an old pecan tree, silent as if it were part of the swamp forest's very flesh. The weathered wooden beams creaked as the door was pushed open in the misty dawn. The wind outside swept through the tattered thatched roof, carrying the scent of fresh mud and thick dampness. Amara stepped inside, sweat still clinging to her neck, her back burdened with the heavy weight of a creature not of this world. She laid the mermaid on the straw bed in the corner of the shack, the spot reserved for Malik whenever he fell ill. The creature's body was cold and soft, like a stream just run dry, her eyes still half open in exhaustion. The golden scales on her tail were now streaked with mud and thorns, but under the faint light seeping through the wall's cracks, they still shimmered with a beauty beyond naming. The soft patter of bare feet sounded behind her. Malik and Zaria, Amara's two children, stood silently in the doorway. Their eyes were wide, glinting with a mix of awe and confusion. Zaria stepped forward, gently tugging at her mother's shirt, and whispered, as if afraid her words might shatter something sacred. "Mum, she has light." Amara didn't answer. She only placed a finger gently on her lips, her eyes signalling, "Be quiet." The three of them stood there as if before a mysterious ritual they didn't fully understand. Sana. That was the name the creature whispered as Amara pressed warm water to her hands after the chaos had settled. Her voice was thin as smoke, each word like a tiny ember on the verge of fading. In the quiet night, with Zaria asleep, Malik resting his head on his mother's lap, and Amara sitting by the fire, Sana spoke, a story unlike anything they had ever heard. She was not human. But neither was she a monster. She belonged to the Posema, a tribe of water spirits who had guarded this swamp since before humans drew maps. They didn't live on the surface but merged with the water, the tree roots, the wind, and the deepest dreams of humankind. For centuries, they had kept the swamp from being overtaken, maintaining balance between nature and the spirit world. But in recent years, the human world had changed. Respect turned to curiosity, curiosity to pursuit. Men in neat clothing carrying cameras and long rifles had invaded the swamp with promises to uncover the uncharted. They didn't come to learn but to possess. One of them, a wealthy white man, infamous for his collection of mythical creatures, had offered a fortune for anyone who could find a real mermaid. The hunters scoured the waters, capturing anything unusual, and Sanaa was their most prized catch. Amara listened in silence. The small fire danced in her eyes, reflecting a world being violated, a sacred lineage being sold like a curiosity in a human market. A quiet anger smouldered within her, not at Sanaa, but at how easily humans trampled the sacred just to satisfy their curiosity. Sanaa didn't beg to stay. She didn't speak of hiding forever, but her eyes, once again, pleaded for one thing: time. A little time to recover, to bring the child in her womb into the world, and return to where she belonged. And Amara, with a mother's instinct, understood that more than anyone. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the thatched roof, Amara's wooden shack remained cloaked in fragile silence. The faint light slipped through the cracks in the walls, casting a silvery glow on Sanaa's face. The mermaid lay there, still as a spirit trapped in mortal flesh, the wounds on her arms soothed by the warm compresses Amara had applied through the night, but her eyes, half closed, had yet to find true rest. The air in the house was thick with an indescribable scent, salty, cool. Mingled with the smell of damp earth was a strange aroma, the scent of ancient waves, of moss and sea breeze, as if carrying the memory of the ocean in every breath. Outside, the old rooster crowed for the third time when a knock came at the door, not rushed, but impossible to ignore. The steady tap-tap echoed like the pulse of suspicion, not hurried, but deliberate. Amara froze mid-task, washing a mud-stained cloth. Her hands stilled in the water, her heart tightening into a solid knot. She had lived long enough to recognize that knock, the sound of someone who came not out of care but out of a need to know. Miss Edna. Her silhouette loomed beyond the door's crack, small but imposing. She didn't need words. Her gaze alone was enough to probe every shadow. Her eyes swept from the yard to the doorstep, lingering on a patch of flattened grass, a faint trace of something large that had passed through. Amara stepped forward, opening the door only a sliver. Miss Edna's voice rang out, dry as a broom scraping parched earth. No pleasantries, no introductions, just a shard of suspicion wrapped in a few short words, heavy with implication. Amara didn't answer. She tilted her head, offering a smile as thin as a falling leaf, letting the question hang in the wind. But inside she felt it clearly. The secret she was sheltering was no longer safe. After Miss Edna left, the shack seemed to shrink. The already small space now felt like it was choking Amara's breath. Steam rose from the pot of porridge, carrying the faint briny scent of the sea from Sanaa's skin. There was no way to mask that smell, no way to hide the difference between human and water spirit dwelling under this roof. That night, Malik muttered in his sleep, disjointed words that made no sense but tightened Amara's heart with every syllable. In his dreams, he spoke of light, of water, of a woman who didn't walk but glided like moonlight on a lake. Amara sat beside him, her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, her own weighed down with dread. She knew children had sharper senses than adults. They could feel what grown-ups tried to deny. And Malik, with eyes that had once watched his father sail away never to return, had surely sensed something in the house that didn't belong to this world. Amara turned to look at Sana, who had drifted into a fitful sleep, her breath as delicate as a thread of mist. The rounded belly rose and fell quietly beneath the tattered blanket, a gentle yet fierce reminder time was running out. Outside, the sun climbed higher, but inside, something sacred was slipping through her fingers, and somewhere in the village, Eyes were already following the direction of the wind. The sky hadn't fully darkened, but black clouds had already shrouded it like a vast burial cloth. The wind turned cold, whistling through the tattered thatched roof of Amara's shack, howling in gusts like stifled sobs. The storm came unannounced, not quite a downpour, but the way the sky held its breath signalled something was drawing near. Word of the hunter's return spread through the village like wildfire through dry grass. They moved in groups, knocking on doors, their eyes cold, hands always resting on the butts of their guns. This time, there were no gentle inquiries. They weren't searching for an object. They were hunting for trembling gazes, evasive breaths, the slightest falter in speech. They could smell fear. And Amara knew fear was something you couldn't hide. She didn't wait for their knock. In the dim twilight, as thunder rumbled like funeral drums in the distance, Amara carefully wrapped Sanaa in her husband's old brocade blanket, the only keepsake left from the man who never returned from the sea. That blanket had once held Amara through nights of grief, cradling both her past and her sorrow. Today, it enveloped another being of the sea, also hunted, also carrying a wordless loneliness. Sanaa was light as water, but the weight of her slick tail and pregnant belly made Amara's steps laborious. The ground beneath had turned to mud, slippery and biting cold. Each step was a gash on her soles, an ache in her back, a sob choked back in her throat. But Amara didn't stop. Not once did she look back. Rain began to fall, silent as if the sky itself didn't want to disturb the sacred stillness. The rain mingled with sweat, with unshed tears, soaking her body as she carried the life of two worlds. Finally, they reached the lake's edge. The water was dark as obsidian, eerily still. No frogs croaked, no night birds called. Only Amara's breath, hoarse and broken, filled the air. She gently set Sanaa down, her hands trembling as she unwrapped the blanket. Sanaa opened her eyes, weak but shining with a strange clarity. No fear, no more despair. Only peace, the kind she had sought in her restless sleep the night before. Sanaa reached out, her hand faintly brushing Amara's neck in a gesture of gratitude. No words were needed, but her voice came anyway, thin as mist but piercing to the heart. You saved me, and an entire lineage of spirits. We will never forget. In that moment, a soft light began to spread from Sanaa's body, not blinding, but gentle, like a full moon melting into the water. The golden scales on her tail glimmered like stars fallen to earth, each pulse of light blending with the rain, the wind, and the lake. Sanaa slipped into the water, silently, without a sound. The surface parted to receive her, then closed again, as if nothing had happened. Amara stood there for a long time, her feet sunk in mud, her eyes fixed on the faintly rippling water. Above, the clouds parted, revealing a trembling sliver of moon. But within her, something had been set right. Not loss, not pain, but a silent promise between mothers. Yet as Amara turned back, she didn't yet know. The strangest gift was quietly waiting at her doorstep. 7 days had passed since that rainy night, the night Amara returned Sanaa to the water, where the mermaid vanished like a star sinking into the lake. For a week, no one in the village knew what had transpired. The hunters left after days of fruitless searching, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. And Amara, she went on with her daily tasks, as if nothing had changed, though within her, each heartbeat carried a different rhythm. At dawn on the 7th day, when the fog still hung thick like a damp blanket over the earth, Amara jolted awake to a strange, cold breeze slipping through the door's cracks. No knock, no sound, just a vague sensation, as if someone had crossed the threshold without leaving footprints. She quickly wrapped an old cloth around herself and opened the door with hands still bearing faint scars from days before. And there, on the earthen step, under the slanting light of a waning moon, was a strange wooden chest, not large, but heavy, very heavy. The chest was intricately carved, its swirling patterns resembling the depths of the ocean. On its lid was the image of a radiant golden fish scale, etched beside a six-pointed starfish. So delicate it seemed to glow, there was no lock, no seal, just an anonymous object sitting silently, as if it had been waiting there for ages. Amara didn't rush to open it. She lifted it with both hands, brought it inside, and only when the sun began to peek through the trees did she gently lift the lid. Inside was light, not blinding, but a gentle light, golden warm, rich like a sunset flowing within the earth. There were strange gold coins she had never seen, wooden charms inscribed with ancient script, and 3 emerald green gems, the size of plums, glowing from within as if they were breathing. Amara didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She simply placed a hand on her chest where her heart beat calmly and let out a long breath. She understood. No thanks were needed. No promises required. This was a response, not just for what she had done, but for the faith she had held through the darkest nights. Months later, whispers began to spread about Amara. The woman who once sold woven baskets by the river had now bought a large plot of land near the village. On that land, a small school was built, with a thatched roof and earthen floor, but always filled with the laughter of children. Malik and Zaria were educated, nurtured not just with good food and warm clothes, but with lessons of kindness, courage, and seeing the sacred in the smallest things. Amara never boasted. She still lived simply, still carried water, still swept the yard, still cooked porridge every morning as before. But each afternoon when the sun fell on the lake like honey, she would sit quietly on the doorstep, her eyes gazing toward the water, a faint smile on her lips. She never shared the story. Not with the village, not with outsiders, not even with her children. For some things endure longest when left unspoken, and when someone, usually a newcomer to the village, hesitantly asked, "Sister Amara, how did you become so prosperous?" She would only smile, gently turning the weathered scale bracelet on her left wrist, and say, "Sometimes, when you save someone, it's you who gets saved." But then, on another night, when the full moon once again shone down on the water, something strange would knock at that small shack's door once more. And so Amara's story closed in silence, not the silence of an ending, but the stillness before a new beginning. For life always finds a way to reward those who bravely choose kindness, even when that kindness means placing their own lives in the hands of fate. In the darkness of poverty, loneliness, and loss, Amara chose light, a light born of unconditional kindness, of compassion amidst the inexplicable, of seeing humanity in the strangest of beings. Her story is not just a legend. It is a reminder that sometimes we don't need to understand everything to do what is right. And perhaps it is in our most powerless moments, when nothing remains but a truthful heart, that true miracles happen. But the light from the chest was only the first sign. The next full moon is drawing near, and the ripples on the lake's surface are stirring once more. Amara thought the story had ended, but Zaria's eyes, the little girl who dreams of the ocean every night, are telling a different tale. So, what awaits them beyond the door of part 2? We'll find out soon enough. If this story touched your heart, drop a like, share this video with someone who needs a spark of hope, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe in miracles? Would you be willing to save a soul without knowing the consequences? Tell me your story. And if you're ready to continue the journey with Amara, let me know you're ready for part 2, because the sacred has never truly left this earth.
There are wounds that do not bleed, they only seep deep into the soul. A year has passed since the night Zaria placed the golden scale into the ancient well. Amara thought she had closed the final chapter of an old destiny. But then, when a little girl from the village vanished without a trace, and the lake's surface suddenly surged on a strange, windy afternoon, Amara knew peace is never truly forever. People began to whisper the old name again, Sanaa, but this time, not as a benefactor, but as a mermaid spirit, returning for something yet to be repaid. And deep in the night, amid the howling wind and the dreams of children, there was a call, one that no one dared to speak aloud. Zaria began to sense something stirring in the earth, beneath the seemingly harmless, tranquil surface of the deep lake. No one else noticed. Only she, as if the spirit of Pazema in her blood was awakening, trembling before an incomplete memory. Each morning, when the sunlight was still fragile, Zaria walked along the lake's edge, her steps heavy with a feeling she could not name. She did not stumble, but each step seemed to be gently pulled downward, as if a soft, cold hand was brushing beneath her feet, beckoning or warning. The nights grew longer. In her dreams, she heard crying, not the kind of crying one might hear from the village children. The sound was distant, yet it pierced to the marrow of her bones. It was as if someone was finding their way back, through the water, through the sighing waves. Amara kept watch over her daughter. She noticed Zaria often woke at midnight, her eyes dreamy, stepping outside as if compelled by a nameless dream. Amara did not scold her, she only stood at a distance, arms wrapped around herself, listening to the wind rustling through the dry coconut leaves. And then, one early morning when the mist still clung to the lotus leaves, Zaria stopped by the water's edge. In the pale water reflecting the gray sky, a tiny object floated faintly, a baby's scarf. The fabric was caked with mud, one corner still threaded with purple, the color of thread her mother had once used to embroider her childhood nightgowns. Zaria's heart skipped a beat. The scarf lay there, like vague proof of something very real, something that had once been buried beneath this lake surface. Rumors spread quickly. The villagers began whispering by their fires. Some said the lake had been unlocked by the blood of a half-breed. Others swore they had seen a golden shadow beneath the water during the last full moon. The disappearance of a child soon after only deepened the spreading fear. And then, the old name was spoken again, Sanaa. But it was no longer uttered with the grateful gaze of a saved soul. This time, her name carried fear, like the call of an undefined unease. Amara heard it all. Sitting behind the door of her house, weaving a basket, she felt each whisper like a sharp thorn piercing her skin. But deep in her heart, she did not believe in evil coming from Sanaa. She was not one to harm others. She was one who had once suffered loss. And if she had returned, it could not be out of hatred, but perhaps because of a wound that had not yet healed. Something or someone had been taken from her, making the waters restless. As for Zaria, since picking up the scarf, she could no longer sleep soundly. Her gaze grew distant, no longer that of the little girl who used to run gleefully around the school, giggling under the sun. A void was growing within her. Not a void of fear, but a void of naming something more sacred than fear. A cry for help. She did not know where she was headed, but her instincts told her it was only the beginning. What was stirring beneath the still surface of that lake? And was Zarya ready to face what would pull her down to the depths of both water and memory? That afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the palm trees, Imani Amara's young student came to class with bewildered eyes. No one asked, but she whispered in Amara's ear. There was a voice in the wind calling her to the lake. The voice was not harsh, not threatening, but soft like a lullaby. So sweet it made her heart sway. Amara bent down, looking deep into the girl's eyes. In that gaze, she saw something familiar. A struggle, like the one she had once seen in her own daughter's eyes. A sense of unease surged, spilling over Amara's chest like crashing waves. She knew this was no longer a coincidence. It was not just the wind playing tricks. The lake, or whatever resided within it, was choosing. It was targeting sensitive souls, children still pure enough to hear sounds beyond the human world. Those calls like tendrils of water reaching out, inviting. And Imani was not the first child to show such strange behavior. Zarya began to doubt herself. Since the dream about the scarf, it was as if something within her body was awakening. Each time she touched water, her palms burned hot, as if drawing energy from the deepest parts of the earth. On full moon nights, she did not sleep instead. She stood silently by the lake, letting the mist seep into every layer of her skin. At times, she thought she heard steady breathing, very close. It was not the sound of the living, nor exactly that of a ghost. It was as if the lake itself were alive and watching. She started avoiding lessons, not out of laziness, but because the sense of being different was growing stronger. Among the crowd, Zarya felt out of place. She was no longer the girl of yesterday, yet she was not sure who she was becoming. Every glance from the villagers, every whispered question, felt like salt rubbed into an already troubled mind. But what frightened her most was the feeling that she herself was somehow stirring something that had once been sealed. Zarya began keeping a diary not in words, but in strange, spiraling shapes, like the symbols that had appeared in her dreams. She did not know why she could draw them, let alone what they meant. But her instincts told her an invisible thread was connecting her to Sanaa, to the missing child, to the lake that had guarded ancient secrets for 1,000 years. Before you continue to immerse yourself in this magical journey, please hit like and subscribe if you love the way we tell stories. Don't forget to comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you live. We always find it truly special to know we're not telling this story alone. That night, the sky was draped in an unbroken veil of darkness. Not even the moonlight could pierce through. Amara wrapped her shawl tighter, silently kindling a fire in the open hearth. The scent of burning dry leaves mingled with the cold wind. Zarya was asleep, but in Amara's heart, there was not a single peaceful dream. Something urged her, demanding action. And she knew exactly what must be done, an ancient ritual, long forgotten, but one her mother had once whispered to her like a seed waiting to sprout. She drew a circle of ash around the fire, lighting 7 candles made from plant fat and fragrant resin. In her hands, she held the golden scale Sanaa had left behind years ago, the only thing still carrying a fragment of the energy that bound them. The wind suddenly stilled as if bowing, and the flames dipped a notch, leaving only a faint golden light flickering. Amara began to chant in the tongue her mother had taught her, the ancient Posema language, the language of water and memory. Her voice was hoarse, trembling, but steady. There was no dazzling magic, no radiant light, only silence. A silence so thick it sent shivers. Then, from behind the bamboo wall, a cold breeze, sharp as stone, slipped through, causing the fire in the hearth to dwindle to glowing embers. Not a sound, not a footstep, but the darkness seemed to breathe. And then an image emerged in the smoke, not clear like a human form, but blurred, like moonlight falling on the lake's surface. It was Sanaa, but no longer the radiant mermaid with golden scales from memory. Her face was pale, her once star-bright eyes now clouded with gray. She appeared like a wound yet to take shape, like a question yet to be answered. She did not speak immediately. She only looked at Amara, a gaze not of resentment, but one that drowned in an ineffable melancholy. Then, in a voice thin as mist, Sanaa whispered, "A child was stolen, a vow was broken, and a part of the blood remains restless." Amara's heart tightened. Sanaa did not say who took the child, nor whose vow had been shattered. But Amara understood the truth was no longer far away. Something in the past, an undercurrent, had veered off course. A child, perhaps the one who had gone missing, was not merely swallowed by the water, but was the center of an incomplete bond between human and spirit. And in the hazy smoke, once more, the golden scale at Sanaa's wrist glimmered, still sparkling, still carrying a hint of warmth. It was not just a sign, but a fragile pulse of hope. Amara understood. Sanaa was still there, not yet fully consumed by sorrow. Her pain was not a curse, but the call of a mother who had once lost her child. In the darkness, Amara whispered, "I will find the child, even if I must step into the shadow of the water." As for the stolen child, was it truly just a child or the missing piece in the mystery between two worlds? The sky was still pitch dark, the ground cloaked in mist like a mourning veil draped across the village. The marsh breeze blew gently, carrying the scent of wild grass and still water. Zaria, wrapped in an old frayed shawl, silently wove through the reeds to reach the place her heart had long called to the ancient well. It was not only the place where the golden scale had once been placed, but also the sole gateway to the secrets buried deep within the soul. Not a sound, not a flicker of light. She knelt, pressing her palms against the icy rim of the well. Her hands trembled, mirroring the turmoil in her heart. She drew a jagged stone fragment from the base of a nearby tree, its edge sharp and resolute. Blood seeped from her finger, dripping into the water in crimson drops, like a call from her heart. The water in the well did not reflect her face. It swirled, rippling outward like waves of memory. In that trembling water, memories not her own emerged. The images were blurred but piercingly vivid. A young woman with disheveled hair, her eyes shimmering with tears like the lake in the rainy season. She clutched a newborn child, its skin smooth as liquid silk, its fish-like tail glinting gold like moonlight fallen on the sea. But the figures in deep green cloaks of the Posema paid no heed. They tore the child from her arms amid heart-wrenching cries. It was not humans who had sundered mother and child. It was the Posema themselves, her own people. In an ancient ritual, under the flickering green torchlight, the child was taken down to the depths of an abyssal chasm in the heart of the ocean. No grave, no cries. Only the mother remained, sitting motionless, her soul turning to stone with a silent call that echoed through countless moons. Zarya recoiled, clutching her chest. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but because something deep within her had been touched. An invisible thread linked her to that memory, not through words, not through blood, but through the soul. She understood that Sanaa had not returned to sow fear, but to reclaim the most sacred thing that had been stolen from her. She touched the water's surface, whispering soundlessly. There was no reply, but none was needed. The well's water stilled, yet it was not cold. It was as if it were listening, bearing witness. And in that moment, Zarya realized pain did not need to be healed with justifications, only to be heard with an open heart. In the early morning breeze, the shawl on her shoulders fluttered lightly, and at the bottom of the well, the final ripples surged once more, then faded, like the sigh of a mother awaiting her child's return after countless stormy seasons. Dawn cast an amber hue over the marsh as Amara, leaning on her staff, stepped out of her simple earthen home. Her back was hunched, her eyes clouded with age, but within her heart still smoldered a flame, not of strength, but of duty. She could not let Zarya bear the burden of dreams and pain from two worlds alone. The wound Sanaa had left behind had now seeped into the veins of the earth, no longer a legend but a reality gnawing at the life here. Amara and Zarya set out to find the stolen child, the nameless child in Sanaa's memory. They waded through overgrown paths, following the rusted fences of old houses. The villagers watched them with eyes half suspicious, half pitying. Some turned away, others avoided them. It was as if the entire village held something in its heart, a heavy silence, thick as the mud in the lake's depths. At every house, every face, Amara knocked and inquired. She carried no anger, only the patient gaze of a mother who had known loss. Even when someone denied knowing anything, she thanked them and moved on. Though no one spoke the truth, she believed memories never die. They only wait for a heart persistent enough to knock on the right door. And then they reached the edge of the forest, where a solitary hut stood, rumored to be the home of a strange old woman living alone. The woman, named Mabara, had hair white as cold ash and eyes that seemed to pierce through others' souls. When Amara mentioned the baby's scarf floating on the lake, Mabara's eyes narrowed, her hand tightening around an old piece of cloth. Her voice was low, but cut through the chest. There was a man, not from this village. He came here when the lake was at its highest. He carried a basket. Something inside it was crying. No more needed to be said. In Amara's heart, a door opened. An image became clear. A man, a trader of mystical beings, rumored to hunt hybrids of spirit and human to sell to nobles from distant lands. Not everyone believed it, but some had stayed silent. Some had known and chosen to look away. Zarya gripped her mother's hand tighter. Neither spoke, but they understood. This was not just about saving a child, it was about facing a truth the community had chosen to forget. Amara held no resentment. There was no room left in her heart for anger. Only compassion remained the same. Compassion that had once driven her to save Sanaa, now urging her to press forward, not for glory or gratitude, but because she knew some mistakes cannot be erased, but they can still be healed through action. And this journey was not just Sanaa's. It was a chance for them all, humans, spirits, witnesses, and the silent, to redeem a fragment of what had been lost in the nightmare of the past. The sun had not yet burned away the thin mist cloaking the marsh when Zarya set out, guided by the fragmented tale of Mabara. She carried a small bag with water, a few remaining scales of Sanaa, and a whispered prayer from Amara. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from something within her, a distant call, both familiar and strange, like the pulse of the ocean in her blood. The path led her to an abandoned plantation, once owned by a noble who hunted hybrid creatures. Overgrown trees, obscured crumbling walls, moss-stained bricks bearing the traces of forgotten secrets. No birds sang, only the wind whistled through rotting wood. Zarya stepped carefully, as if touching the past with her bare feet. Beneath a sagging porch, she found a locked room. After several attempts, the door creaked open, revealing a space where time seemed frozen. In one corner stood a small bamboo cradle, coated in thick dust. On the walls, crude drawings, waves, wings, and the face of a woman with hair flowing like a river. Zarya shuddered. She did not know the child, yet her heart stirred as if she had held it in a dream. From the shadows, a boy of about 7 stepped forward silently. His eyes were bright but strange, clear as the lake in dry season, yet deep as roots sinking into the earth. He said nothing, only watched her with a gaze that mixed curiosity and caution. When Zarya approached, he stepped back, clutching a tattered cloth embroidered with a golden starfish. No confirmation was needed. She knew this was Ao. Zarya did not ask or explain. She sat down, opened her bag, and took out one of Sanaa's scales. In the sunlight, it emitted a gentle glow, like a wave lapping at the heart. The boy stared, then reached out to touch it. In that moment, Zarya saw a flood of memories in Ao's eyes. The sound of waves, a lullaby like the wind, and Sanaa's face, the mother who once sang to him in the embrace of water, before being torn from his side. Ao did not remember clearly, but the feeling had never left him. He hugged Zarya tightly, and for the first time spoke, "Sister, are you from the sea?" The question pierced Zarya's heart like a needle. She was not from the sea, but she understood the sea. She understood the wordless voids, the losses no one named. And she knew that sometimes just having someone sit beside you in silence was enough to heal. All that day, Zarya stayed with Ao. She taught him how to hold someone's hand without fear, how to listen to the wind as if it told stories, and how to believe he belonged somewhere, even if that place was still far away. Before leaving, she placed the remaining scale in Ao's hand. "This is a promise. I'll come back. But next time, it won't just be me, it'll be your mother too." In Ao's eyes, a spark glimmered, faint as morning mist, but painfully real. And Zarya knew the journey was not over. They had found the door, but would they have the courage to step through? Would Sanaa reunite with her child in peace? Or would the marsh rise again with new trials? Amara did not question, did not panic, nor did she stop Zarya when she brought Ao home. The woman simply gazed at the boy for a long time, with the same look that had once enveloped Zarya in her arms years ago, with the full heart of a mother who had known both loss and hope. From that moment, Ao was no longer a stranger. He was a lost piece of her heart, and now he had returned. She began to care for him as she had once cared for Malik and Zarya when they were young. A pot of gumbo, simmered slowly with tender papaya leaves and smoked fish, was ladled into an old porcelain bowl, the first meal the boy received from a mother's hand. Each morning, Amara woke Ao with a soft hum. Each evening, she sat beside him, telling ancient stories of ancestors, of the marsh, of water spirits that never slept. Ao, though more silent than talkative, gradually opened up. He followed Zaria to the well, listening to the wind whistling through the reeds, sitting beside Amara as she mended clothes or ground medicine from roots. But what moved Zaria most was when the boy cried for the first time, not from pain, but because Zaria sang the ancient songs of the Posema. Her voice, soft as silk, deep as the heart of water, made Io tremble. He did not understand the words, but his heart remembered. Amara did not ask why he cried. She only gently held him. And when Ao nestled his head against her chest, hearing the steady beat of her heart, he understood. This was a safe place. No one would take him away. No one would sell him. No one would deceive him with false names. One night, when the moonlight shimmered across the lake, Zaria was lulling Io to sleep when Amara called her outside. They stood together by the water's edge, silent. Then a radiant golden light emerged from the distance, like stars falling onto the lake's surface. Sanaa. She did not appear in clear form, only as a shimmering veil of light, surrounded by mist and memory. But within that light were eyes, the eyes of a mother who had waited a lifetime just to see her child once more. No words were needed. Ao, as if guided by something sacred, stepped out from the porch. He walked toward the lake, still clutching the golden scale Zaria had given him. When the light touched his skin, there were no cries, no sounds of fear, only a smile. For the first time, Ao smiled like a child. Amara stood still. Her heart ached as if it were breaking, but it was the sweet pain of a mother who knew that love was not in holding tight, but in letting go at the right moment. She held Zaria's hand and whispered, like a prayer, "Being a mother doesn't require flesh and blood. It only needs a heart wide enough to love and brave enough to let go." As the light faded into the night's mist, Ao turned back and hugged Amara once more. He did not need to choose. For he knew, from now on, he had two worlds. One, the deep sea of Sanaa, and the other, the good earth of Amara. Dawn draped the lake like a white silk veil, with mist still clinging to the grass tips and butterflies yet to stir from their slumber. In that moment, Zaria and Ao quietly approached the water's edge, where all memories began and all sorrows had once burst forth. Io still clutched the golden scale, the only remnant of the mother who bore him, of a world he knew only through hazy dreams. He placed his hand on the lake's surface. There was no thunder, no gusting wind, no radiant light, only a small ripple spread outward, gentle as a breath. Then, from the depths, a warm, low lullaby rose, a sound only someone cradled in a mother's arms could recognize. For the first time, Ao felt no fear. He did not feel pulled away, nor lost. He only felt himself standing between two worlds, both reaching out to embrace him. Zaria looked at him, her eyes glowing not from the sunlight, but because she knew Ao did not need to leave to become part of the sea. He could grow up here, with Amara, carrying the depths of Posema within him, while living with the most human of hearts. She understood this, for she too had walked that path between sea and land, between legend and reality, between love and sacrifice. In the distance, Amara stood on the porch, her calloused hands cradling a steaming cup of tea. All the storms within her had now calmed. She did not need to ask what would come, nor instruct what should be kept. Seeing Io smile, seeing Zaria stand firm, was enough to make her heart feel weightless. Some children are not born from the womb, but from kindness. No oaths, no magic, only the daily choice to love without conditions. In that scene, a golden light rose once more from the lake's depths. Sanaa did not take form, but she no longer needed to. A soul had been healed, a pain had been named, and a mother could finally rest in the heart of the water. That light was not a farewell, but a harmony of the ocean and the marsh, of blood and spirit, of loss and renewal. Zarya held Ao's hand tightly, whispering as if it were a promise needing no fulfillment. You belong here. And if one day you want to return to the sea, I'll be the one to row the boat to send you off. Ao smiled, nodding as if he understood. Behind them, the sound of children's voices rose from the small school Amara had built, the earthen drum beating for the start of the day's lessons. Life went on, not with magic, but with the human heart. But when night fell, at the lake's bottom, a faint green spark flickered, as if another soul was stirring awake. Had the story truly ended, or was it only the beginning of another journey? Some stories don't need to end with a door closing, but with a heart opening. The journey of Amara, Zarya, and Ao was not just a search. It was a test of motherhood, of compassion, and of the ability to forgive what seems unforgivable. In a world where spirits and humans intertwine, the only thing that can keep them standing is not strength, but love, sincere, unconditional. This story reminds us that being a mother is not about holding on to a child at all costs, but about giving them wings strong enough to fly and a heart warm enough to remember the way back. Just as Amara did quietly, steadfastly, and as deeply as the marsh that has nurtured dreams for generations. Dear friend, if you have ever loved, lost, or learned to let go, this story is for you. And now, I have a question for you. Will the legacy of the Pozima bloodline be carried forward by Ao, or is a new generation waiting to be awakened between the marsh and the sea? If this story has touched your heart, drop a like. Share it with someone you believe needs healing too. Comment below to let me know where you're reading from and what time it is where you are. You'll be surprised to see how many people from all corners of the world share your feelings in a story that might seem unfamiliar. Until we meet again in the next chapter, if your heart still longs to listen, sometimes a soul returns not to be welcomed, but to ask, why was I forgotten? On a moonless night, Amara woke to the sound of soft knocking at the door. Not forceful, not hurried, but heavy, like a silent grudge from the past. When the door creaked open, she saw Malik, the son who had once left the village in silence, now returning in the shadows. He said nothing, only bowed his head, and from his cloak fell a seashell necklace, the very one Amara had lost when she saved the mermaid Sanaa. In that moment, time seemed to choke. No one spoke, but both knew. Something had been wrong for a very long time, and tonight was when the truth began to knock. Once upon a time, in the community of African American people, when dawn rose slowly over the village, thick with the scent of the lowlands, the corner of the lake was still shrouded in shadow, as if it had forgotten that a radiant golden soul once emerged from its depths. But in Amara's heart, deep within, was a gnawing fear. Each dream of Malik returned more vividly. The face of the boy now grown, eyes dark and heavy, and arms cold as if yearning to reach out again. Zarya was preparing to head to the pier for the day's first batch of silk when she heard a clattering in the yard, the sound of unfamiliar clogs on damp earth, then gradually the sound of knocking at the door. Amara opened it. Before her stood a tall, lean young man, draped in a tattered cloak worn from long journeys, wearing a blue bone bracelet on his wrist, the very bracelet Sanaa had given Amara that night long ago. Amara's throat tightened. It was Malik. He had returned, but no longer the little boy she had hidden among the mossy rocks behind the garden. His gaze was deeper, and more pained. Across his chest was a faint scar, and in his hand was an old book wrapped in dried banana leaves. He stared at Amara for a long time, as if trying to read a thread of memories that could not be named. Malik was led into the house. The neighbors began to whisper. Some remembered, others murmured softly. Everyone thought Malik had vanished into the night of the widow's storm, yet here he was, returning in the flesh. Zaria looked at her brother like a mystery. In Malik were two worlds entwined. The simplicity of someone who had lived through countless hardships and a strange serenity of someone who had stood long before the realm of death. Amara placed her hand on her son's shoulder. The warmth of his skin was still the same, but the weight within had changed. On Malik's hand was a cold stone ring etched with the mark of Posima. He spoke of a distant island where people raised hybrid children to harvest their souls for medicine to preserve youth. He had been sold as a boy, like a traded object of a poor existence. But Malik hadn't returned merely for blood ties. He opened a leather pouch and placed it on the table. Inside was a piece of golden scale now dulled, a dried flower branch, and a scrap of rabbit skin carved with a spiral pattern. That bundle was the final sign Sanaa had sent before dissolving into the lake's depths. If someone finds this scale, it means they are ready to look deepest within themselves. Amara glanced at the doorway. It had been so long since she last thought of the blue bone bracelet Sanaa had given her. She thought it was lost, forgotten, but now it was back, on her son's hand, like a silent vow. In that moment, in every glance, in every pain thought to have faded, a spark began to flicker again. Malik returned, bearing the marks of two worlds. But what had he brought back? What was it that Sanaa could have sacrificed her very soul to entrust to Amara? There are mornings when the mist has not yet fully lifted, but the sun already pours fire onto the thatched roofs. The wind whistles through the marsh, carrying the briny smell of algae and something stranger, a dry, rasping breath, as if echoing from ancient earth. Zaria sat on the porch, her gaze following Malik, her younger brother, who was arranging small stones in a spiral pattern under the baobab tree. Since the blue bone bracelet began to glimmer like embers each moonlit night, the boy had been sleepwalking often and speaking little. It was as if a part of him no longer lived in this world. Amara watched both of them from behind an old silk curtain. Something was amiss. It wasn't just Malik's silence, but the sense that their house lay at the center of an enchanted circle feathers that didn't drift with the wind, the old village dog barking at empty air, and each night, the well water rising, despite no rain. That evening, when Zaria opened the wooden box where she kept the golden scale from years ago, she discovered a strand of silvery blue hair wrapped around it, not from a living soul. And at that very moment, the blue bone bracelet around Malik's neck blazed brightly, as if an invisible hand had just awakened something long dormant. The boy stood up, eyes closed, his hand pointing toward the western marsh where the rocky hollow lay, the place Amara once said was where Sanaa had last emerged. Without a word, all three moved toward it. On the cracked earth, a spiral of broken stones appeared identical to the one Malik had drawn that morning. At the center of the spiral was a scorched mark, as if someone had once knelt there, praying or surrendering. Zaria felt her skin prickle, as if her soul had brushed against a forgotten oath. In Amara's ears, Sanaa's old whisper returned. Every drop of blood carries a debt, and every soul saved bears a responsibility that cannot be brushed away. Zaria turned to Malik. The boy took her hand, silently. In that moment, without words, she knew. The bracelet was not just a keepsake, it was a lock, and perhaps also a key. Could Malik be the missing thread between Posima and the human world? And if so, what awaited them at the bottom of that lake amidst the night and memories? Dear audience, please take a moment to relax or sip a glass of water, then continue listening to the story as surprising twists await. Comment the number 1 if you find the story intriguing, so we know you're still with us. That night, sleep was no longer peaceful for Zarya. She lay curled up beside Amara, but her soul seemed to drift far from the small earthen house. In her dream, she stood in the heart of a dried-up lake. The water had vanished, leaving only scorching sand beneath a blood-red sundae. At the center of the lake sat a crying child. The sobs didn't echo aloud, but resonated within Zarya like waves crashing against her heart. She reached out, but with each step, her body crumbled into dust. By the time she was nothing but a whisper in the wind, the child looked up. Its eyes were Io's eyes. Zarya jolted awake. Her breath came in gasps, her forehead slick with sweat, her hand still clutching the seashell necklace, the only piece of jewelry Sanaa had left her on that fateful night. She had never taken it off, not for its beauty, but because it felt as though each spiral in the shell held a fragment of the ocean's memory, waiting for her to name it. The next morning, she returned to the ancient well alone. She didn't call anyone. She didn't tell her mother. It was as if an invisible hand guided her soul. She sat down, brushed back her sweat-dampened hair, and slowly removed the necklace. Not to discard it, but to place it on the edge of the well, the last place she had felt the gentle touch of Sanaa's spirit. The sand around the well suddenly stirred. No wind, no bird song, only a sound like distant waves echoing from deep within the earth. Then, a thin thread of light appeared. From within that light, memories not belonging to Zarya flooded in. She saw Sanaa, not the radiant mermaid under the moonlight, but a young mother cradling her newborn child on the shore. But within moments, hands draped in, red cloth surged forward. They didn't seize with violence, but with a terrifying, intangible power. The laws of the Posima tribe. The child was taken in the dark of night, without a cry, without a farewell, and Sanaa, she collapsed on the sandy shore, where the salty waves mingled with her tears. In that moment, Zarya understood Sanaa's pain didn't stem from resentment, but from a loss that had never been given a name. The dream faded, but Zarya's breathing remained heavy. She stood, her hand tightening around the necklace as if gripping a piece of her own flesh. On her chest, the cord now glowed faintly, not brilliantly, but smoldering, like a fire waiting to be rekindled. And she knew if anyone could bring that light back to Sanaa, it was her, the child who carried 2 worlds within. Zarya turned to walk back, her heart surging like waves. Amara was already standing on the porch, her expression needing no questions. For in her mother's eyes, Zarya saw something words could not convey: absolute trust. In the distance, the lake remained still, but no one knew that beneath its waters, a soul waited to meet the gaze of its own flesh and blood. Would Zarya find the stolen child, and would that be enough to heal the heart of a mermaid betrayed by her own tribe? The early morning breeze swept through the mangrove branches, making the leaves tremble as if whispering something incomprehensible. Zarya no longer felt the lake was calm. In every rippling wave were fleeting images: curly hair soaked with water, a tender hand reaching out through the surface, a sigh that didn't come from lungs. Her dreams began to take vivid shape, no longer just the cries of a child, but eyes agaze once stolen from its first embrace. Before the sun had fully risen, Zarya stepped onto the red earth behind the house, where the ancient well had so often led her to memories not her own. She wore the seashell necklace Sanaa had given her years ago, her palm clutching it tightly as if beseeching an invisible strength from the Soul Mother. Zarya didn't cut her hand as she had before. Instead, she removed the necklace's pendant, letting the coral bead gently touch the crystal clear water. A ripple surged, reflecting her image split into two. One was Zarya, the girl of the marsh, Amara's daughter. The other was an incomplete form, faint as mist, but those were the eyes she had seen in her dream. The child was wrapped in a pasema cloth, being carried away under moonlight in a silent ritual. The lullabies weren't meant to soothe, but to bid farewell. She felt the pain clearly, as if her own umbilical cord had been severed once more. Zarya didn't cry. She stood still. The truth was no longer a doubt, but something alive in her blood. That child wasn't a dream. It was a part of her mother Sanaa, torn from life by an ancient Pasema law, a ban on raising hybrid children with human blood. Instead of acceptance, the tribe had sold the child in the night, believing a soul split between worlds could not survive long in one. In Zarya's heart, then, was not only pain, but a smoldering anger. No one had told her that love could be deemed a mistake. No one had said a soul could be stripped of its mother just because two worlds couldn't find harmony. She sat down, her back against the ancient mangrove trunk, closing her eyes as if listening to the voice of the earth. From deep within her mind, the lullaby returned. This time, it didn't come from the lake, but from another place where water and roots intertwined like veins. That lullaby wasn't Sanaa's alone. It was the voice of mothers silenced, who had lost their children to those cloaked in the name of preserving tradition. Zarya opened her eyes. She knew she had to go, not far away, but to the place where the truth was hidden. To the depths of the forest where the elders still whispered of the shadow camp, the place that once held hybrid children, the final boundary between magic and the mortal world. She needed no instructions. In her hand was the necklace. In her heart, a memory that required no proof. And somewhere behind her, Amara, the mother of blood and heart, had been standing, unnoticed, until now. She didn't stop her. She only placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, a calloused hand carrying silent consent. For there are journeys that cannot be halted, only wish to end in forgiveness. In the hurried breath of the forest, Zarya began her quest to find the stolen child, not only to return a child to its mother, but to mend the rift between two worlds that had cracked long before her birth. Would that deep forest still hold traces of a young soul, or had everything been buried by a generation's silence? In the days after Sanaa's necklace awoke, Zarya was no longer herself. She walked as if bearing an invisible boulder on her back, her gaze more distant yet clearer than ever before. Something had stirred within her, a part of her blood, a part of memories not from her life but living in every pulse. The necklace from Sanaa was like a conduit between two worlds, not only linking the sea to the marsh, but also connecting the present to a pain that had never been named. Amara saw it in her first glance. She didn't need to ask. She knew when a woman carried an unanswerable question within her, she would seek a way out at all costs. And she also knew if Zarya had begun to walk, the truth was very near. Zarya left the village as the mist still lingered. She headed west, toward the forest that was once a trading hub for those who smuggled souls. Faint stories of the camp for hybrid children, where children like her were once imprisoned, traded for gems, or sold to those who hunted mythical creatures, still whispered in the village nights. No one knew exactly where it lay, but Zarya knew her heart was guiding her. She heard a faint thumping beneath the earth each time she drew closer, as if memories were pulsing in the soil, waiting for someone to call their name. The abandoned plantation appeared after 4 days of pushing through thickets and traces of time. Cracked walls, a wooden sign half buried under green moss, and the acrid scent of old blood still lingered in the air. Zarya stepped through the rusted iron gate, feeling as if she were entering the heart of an unhealed wound. A soft breath sounded from a shack at the end of the yard. A boy, gaunt and wild as if raised by wind and memories, sat curled up in a corner. His eyes, unmistakable, were those of the deep sea. Clear, fathomless, yet carrying the bewilderment of one who didn't know where he came from. Zarya didn't need to ask. Her heart already knew. It was Ao. He remembered nothing but fleeting dreams of lulling waves, a soft hand touching his cheek, and strange sounds in a language Zarya had heard since she was in her mother's womb. The Pazima language needing no study, only feeling. Zarya didn't cry, but when she touched the boy's small forehead, it felt as if she were embracing the piece of the sea's lost soul. She didn't know if she was worthy or capable of being a sister or merely a messenger, but one thing she knew for certain: Ao shouldn't stay here. No one, whether human or child of the sea, deserved to grow up in oblivion and solitude. She carried Io on her back, trekking through the forest, back to the marsh. Each step was a call from the sea and a silence from the earth. Two worlds watched in stillness. That evening, when they reached Amara's thatched hut, she asked nothing. She only cooked a large pot of gumbo, divided it into 3 bowls, and let the boy sit between them as if he had always been part of the home. Zarya watched Io eat heartily, then quietly placed Sanaa's necklace on the table. Its golden glow was as radiant as ever, but this time, it was not just a symbol of the sea, but proof of a stolen legacy, now being returned. But would a sister's love be enough to fill the cracks of time in Io? Or was there another truth, deeper still, waiting to be awakened in the boy's dreams? The crescent moon hung low against a charred sky, its silver light shimmering on the lake's surface like a morning veil. Zarya sat by the old mangrove root, the Pazima necklace on her chest trembling faintly as if sensing something. Her hand tightly gripped Amara's old journal filled with scattered notes, fragmented drawings, and an unsent letter. Ao was asleep, but tonight his sleep was restless. He jolted awake, cold sweat soaking him, his lips murmuring a strange melody, not a mother's lullaby, but a whisper echoing from a dream as deep and endless as the ocean floor. Zarya stood, unsure what compelled her feet to lead her to the northern cliff. Once a site of ancient rituals, it now held only moss-covered stones and a faded carving, as if its life had been drained. She placed her hand on the stone, feeling as if she were touching a memory. Blurred images flooded in, the wail of a child, fish scales falling to the ground, and a vow torn apart. Above, a black bird flew past, crying out 3 times, like a warning. When she returned, Io was standing by the lake's edge. The boy held the other Pazima necklace, the one Sana had given Amara, its golden glow flickering in his hand. Somehow, Ao had found it in the pile of old ashes behind the house. He looked at his sister, those dark eyes deeper than childhood should allow. He asked in a voice not his own, "If the path I walk isn't human, will you still hold my hand?" Zarya didn't answer, but in her chest, her heart felt like it might shatter. She pulled Io into her arms, feeling their pulses merge between 2 halves of blood, between 2 worlds. Beneath their feet, the lake trembled. Not violently, not fiercely, just like the long sigh of something that had waited too long to be seen in the light. That night, Zarya dreamed of a bottomless black sea, where a radiant golden figure wept. Sanaa didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. No blame, no resentment. Only a silent request. Return the missing soul to the ocean. Not to lose it, but to let it merge. Not to sever, but to connect. Zarya awoke before dawn. Her heart carried an unspoken decision. In Io's chest, the necklace glowed with veins of life, as if it had never stopped breathing. Beyond, where the lake lay still as a sheet, a silver mist began to spread like the outstretched wings of a mother about to embrace her child. Zarya understood. To heal a soul, sometimes it must return to its roots, not through blood, but through choice. But was Io ready? And could a soul torn apart by humanity be made whole again through love? The sky had not yet fully brightened, but the air was steeped in the indigo-purple hue of a night reluctant to fade. Mist clung to the leaves, like tears lingering after an unfinished dream. Zarya sat by the glowing embers of the fire, her hands cradling a steaming cup of herbs. It wasn't the cold that made her tremble, it was a feeling too elusive to name. Since returning with Ao, the small house in the marsh, which seemed peaceful, had become a place where memories stirred each night. Ao still hadn't called her sister. The boy was quiet, reserved, but his eyes spoke volumes. Whenever Zarya sang a lullaby, he didn't sleep, he only shed silent tears. Those tears didn't stem from fear, but from a shapeless longing. Like Zarya once was, caught between two worlds, one the embrace of a mother now gone, the other a life no one had taught her how to belong to. Amara remained the gentle presence in that home. Though her hair had gained a few more silver strands, she was patient each day, cooking, storytelling, mending the tears in the souls of children without roots. To Ao, she was nothing less than a true grandmother. She didn't ask, didn't push, simply stayed present long enough, calm enough, for the boy to slowly shed the rough shell of his wounds. One evening, as the full moon silently rose to its peak, Zarya took Ao to the lake's edge. The water was still as a mirror, reflecting the sibling silhouettes like two souls walking side by side between worlds. There was no ritual, no incantation, only Ao's small hand placed on the water's surface, and for the first time, he smiled. Not a full smile, but a small glimpse of trust beginning to open. From the depths of the water, a shimmering golden light spread outward. Sana didn't fully appear, but Zarya felt her presence more clearly than ever. A peace that needed no form, only connection. That light enveloped Ao, gentle as a mother's hand stroking her child's hair after a nightmare. Ao tilted his head slightly, his gaze bewildered but no longer lost. In that moment, he seemed to realize he hadn't been abandoned. Not forsaken, but preserved in fate's own quiet way. Zarya brought the boy back, but this time, her heart was free of the question, will he choose the sea or the land? For love wasn't about holding on or letting go, but teaching another to stand strong wherever they were. In the days that followed, the small house became a haven for simple miracles. Warm meals, Ayo's laughter ringing out as he played with the other children, Amara's eyes gleaming with pride each time she watched Zarya care for her brother like a piece of her own heart. One night, Zarya opened the old wooden box where she kept the golden necklace Sana had given her as a child. The necklace was still pristine, but for the first time, it glowed as if in response. No blind faith or grand promises were needed. Only unwavering love was enough to awaken the sacred that had slumbered in flesh and blood. Zarya placed the necklace around Ao's neck the next morning. She said nothing, but her eyes carried a vow. You are part of this story. Not to be a hero, but to know you have always been loved in the quietest of ways. In the distance, beyond the lake, Sanaa's golden spark silently sank like a blessing. No need to appear, only for love to find its rightful place, its rightful person. The sun rose slowly over the marsh, casting light like silk spread across the lake. It was no longer the radiant light of those early days, but a gentle, seasoned glow, like a mother who had lived long enough to know that love need not be loud. That morning, Zaria led Ao to the lake's edge, where she had once buried her fears, where secrets lay submerged beneath the water, and where the silent lullabies of the Posima spirits had nurtured her. Ao was no longer the quiet boy of before. He had learned to smile, to listen to birdsong instead of the sighs in his dreams. But in the depths of his eyes, something remained incomplete, something Zaria knew could only be healed by the profound connection between two worlds. He placed his hand on the water's surface. The lake rippled with gentle waves, spreading outward like the heartbeat of someone about to summon something sacred. A faint golden light appeared, not as dazzling as before, but like a tender breath of the ocean, slow, serene, yet enough to still the heart. There was no form, no call, only the echo of an ancient song the lullaby Sana once sang beneath the sea. Io stood motionless, no tears, no fear. He only closed his eyes, as if his soul were returning to an old home, seeking the embrace it had lost. Zaria said nothing. She stood beside her brother, letting him find his own path back. For love wasn't about guiding the way, but standing still so a child could find the courage to step forward. Amara watched from a distance. She didn't intrude on that sacred moment. She had stood like this when Malik was lost, when Zaria wandered back in a form half human, half spirit. And now, seeing Io find the missing piece in his heart, she knew her weary journey had finally reached an end, worth finding peace in. The necklace, the one Sanaa had given Zaria, now hung around Ao's neck, glowing as if recognizing the blood of its maker. That light was not just a symbol, it was an affirmation. The Posema bloodline had never been lost. It had only hidden, waiting for the right moment to be awakened by unconditional love. Io opened his eyes and looked at his sister. In that gaze was something both old and new, as if the child from before had transformed into a thread connecting this world to the world of forgotten souls. He didn't need to go anywhere. The sea no longer called with the voice of loneliness. He understood. He could stay, live as part of the land, while still carrying the ocean's song in his heart. Zaria took his hand, gripping it tightly, not to hold him back, but to remind him, wherever you go, you carry a family behind you. No need for names, no need for instructions. Just remember, you were loved. Behind them, Amara's small house glowed in the morning light. Children ran and played in the earthen yard, the sound of drums heralding a new day. No more cries, no more fleeting shadows in the night. Everything now was real simple, but brimming with life. Sanaa didn't return, at least not in the old way. She was present in every glint of light on the water, in every lullaby carried by the breeze through the roof, in Ao's gaze whenever he looked into the distance and smiled. A soul no longer wandering, but now the gentlest part of their family's memory. Zaria whispered softly to Ao, like a final vow, "You don't need to be a legend. You just need to live as you are. That's enough for me." He nodded, his eyes sparkling with the reflection of the Sunday, and somewhere, from the heart of the lake, a green light flickered and vanished as if the universe were whispering, "This story isn't over. It's only beginning a new chapter." What will the children carrying the ancient bloodline write next for the Pazima legend? And in some corner of the lake, is there a soul still waiting to be awakened by a love deep enough? Beneath the twilight sky, as the ceremonial drums of the day's end echoed through the marshland trees, the story of Zarya, Amara, Sana, and Io quietly drew to a close, but its echoes lingered. Not all questions had found answers. Not all wounds had fully healed. Yet, in their journey to reclaim their roots, they had touched something greater than truth-compassion, a love that needed no flesh and blood to be deep enough to mend a lost soul. We once thought blood was everything, that only a birth mother could be called a mother, that only shared blood could forge a bond. But this story reminds us that sometimes a woman needs only a timely embrace, a silent prayer, or a touch in the night to become a mother in the most sacred sense. And that golden-scaled necklace, once forgotten, now resting against Zarya's chest like a pulse of both worlds, the deep sea and the marsh, loss and rebirth. The Pazima legacy, thought to have faded, was now carried forward not just by blood, but by the choice to preserve love, forgiveness, and memory. What do you think? Is this the end for Zarya and Ayo, or merely the beginning of a new legend? Don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the African Tales Best channel. Leave your thoughts and share if this story touched something deep within your heart. And don't forget, somewhere out there, another soul may be waiting to be named. "Lord, if you want my child, kill me first." Malachi shouted amidst the thick fog of the Mississippi swamp, his body bare, hands empty, facing an entity not of this world. Before him stood the river god Osun, the true father of the child Malachi had carried through the mud, nurtured for 7 long years a child not of his blood, but the very essence of his soul. This story is not merely about miracles. It poses a question to you. If you encountered a dying mythical creature in the forest, would you turn away or risk everything to save it and embrace an unimaginable fate? Do not look away from the screen, for what you are about to hear will make you wonder, would I dare to do the right thing when no one knows I did it? Once upon a time, in the gloomy and wild Yazoo Basin of northern Mississippi, where tree roots pierced the earth like the claws of ancestors clinging to memory, where fog draped over the lake like sleepless spirits, there lived a man as quietly as if the world had forgotten him. Malachi. His name rang out like a sound no one had called in years. That name was once tied to a crime he could not defend himself against. 12 years ago, he was a young man who smiled under the moonlight, strummed a guitar, and walked his mother to the market on Sundays. But then, in a single night, he vanished behind bars, carrying the weight of a sentence from a society that needed no evidence, just a black face in the wrong place at the wrong time. When he was released, he had nothing. No home, no parents, no friends. Tin Hollow, the village that had raised him, was now a place where people avoided his gaze as if his eyes were proof of something more terrifying than the truth. An innocent man could be crushed so easily. Malachi built a wooden shack on the edge of the swamp, where no one came, no one asked, and no one needed to remember him. Old wood, a leaky roof, a cold ash-filled stove, that was all he had. No one hired him, except for a few too old to carry water, or too poor to refuse his calloused hands. He traded buckets of water for dried fish, wilted greens, or a few stale cornbread loaves. His life was not living, it was surviving in silence. By day, he cleared weeds, chopped firewood, and carried water for the village. By night, he sat on his doorstep, playing the wooden flute his mother had given him when he was 13. The flute's soft notes drifted across the water, blending with the croaks of frogs, the hum of insects, and the rustling wind, like whispers of ancestral spirits. Sometimes, he paused, staring into the dense forest. There was something in his eyes, not despair, not resentment, but expectation. A quiet yet persistent feeling, as if a part of his soul was still wandering somewhere, unable to find its way back. Each early morning, before the fog lifted, Malachi walked to the stream running through the forest, not for water, but as a ritual. He bent down, washing his hands in the icy water that stung like needles, seeing his blurred reflection on the surface. He was still himself, but no longer the man he once knew. His eyes were now shadowed, not from lack of sleep, but from too many unspoken dreams. The whole village knew him, but no one truly knew anything about him. Children were warned that if they misbehaved, Malachi will come for you. Women avoided his gaze when passing by with their water jugs. Men clicked their tongues as he walked by, as if his presence reminded them of a justice bought and sold. But no one knew that whenever someone fell ill, he secretly left a bundle of medicinal herbs at their door. No one saw, but when a storm was coming, leaky roofs were mysteriously patched in the night. Malachi asked for nothing. He simply acted because a part of him still believed. If he could not be recognized, at least he could be forgiven. Not by others, but by his own heart. Perhaps that was why he often gazed at the swamp. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was honest. The swamp judged no one. It hid corpses as it hid seeds. It was silent, filthy, tangled, but at its core, it always held life. Malachi believed that if any miracle were to happen in his life, it would not come from a church or a courtroom. It would come from a forgotten, damp, shadowy place like himself. And then, on a morning when the fog was as thick as a blade blanketing the earth, when even the birds fell silent, that very place called his name. Have you ever felt the whole world turn its back on you, but your heart still whispers, "It's not over yet"? Not all sounds in the forest come from life. Some, quieter, erupt from despair. And on that night, the night when fog blanketed the path like a cold, damp shroud, Malachi heard a sound unlike any animal's growled. It was not the hoot of an owl, nor the croak of a frog. It was urgent and choked, like a whisper strangled between two worlds. He stopped, his hand tightening around the handle of his worn water bucket. The fog clung to him, cold and sticky like invisible fingers. The willows leaned toward the lake, their roots crawling over the ground like ancient, sorrowful snakes. The air seemed to thicken into layers, without wind, without light, only waiting. Malachi moved slowly. His steps were heavier than usual, not because of the muddy ground, but because of a premonition gripping his chest like the hand of his old mother warning him not to stray too far. But Malachi pressed on. He walked toward the largest willow by the bank, where the sound grew clearer, and then he saw a body shimmering in the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. It was not the glow of human skin, but a radiant metallic sheen, like a sunset dissolving into water. Golden scales covered the lower half of the creature, glinting like thousands of ancient coins stacked together. But on that skin were deep red scratches, welts from ropes cutting into flesh, blood mingling with rainwater, dripping onto the earth like the ticking of guilty time. She was not an ordinary woman, nor was she a monster. She was something in between, or perhaps beyond both boundaries. She was bound tightly with alligator leather ropes, loops encircling her chest, abdomen, and wrists. Her belly was round, not from fullness, but from carrying a life within. Old and new wounds intertwined, and her eyes wide open, bloodshot, yet shedding no tears, silently gazed at Malachi, as if she had been waiting for him for a long time. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what she was or where she came from. He just stood still. And in that fragile moment between question and action, his reason told him, "Turn back. This isn't your business." But his heart had learned to be silent long ago. And because of that, it could hear things the world no longer heard, Malachi stepped forward, not hurriedly, not fearfully, just walking as if he already knew what he had to do. The small knife at his side, the one used for whittling firewood, didn't tremble in his hand as he raised it. The alligator leather ropes were tough, like the belts of prison guards. Malachi cut through each loop, his hands bleeding when the blade slipped, but he didn't stop. Each time a rope loosened, the skin revealed beneath the moonlight drove him to keep going. Finally, the last rope fell to the ground, silent as the forest's sigh. The mermaid's body curled, exhausted, depleted. But her eyes still looked at him. Not with fear, not with resentment. Just gratitude, quietly, genuinely. Malachi didn't know what he was doing, but he knew one thing. He couldn't leave her there, not just because she was a strange creature, but because of something deeper, smoldering. Perhaps because, for the first time in years, he felt someone needed him to keep living. No words passed between them. But amid the broken breaths, something shifted. Not life, but fate. A gentle breeze began to blow. The fog still lingered, but the air was different now. Beneath his feet, the swamp's earth no longer felt as cold. And in his ears, the initial moans had faded into nothingness, leaving only the sound of Malachi's heart beating slowly, steadily, like the ancient drum of a soul newly awakened. All right, my dear audience, brace yourselves for a mystical, breathtaking story about a man once abandoned by the world, yet chosen by spirits to raise the child of a river god. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you live. It always feels magical when we connect with each other from every corner of the earth to share stories no one could have imagined. Sometimes people don't run out of fear. They run because they know that if they pause for even a single beat, what they hold in their hands might vanish forever. Malachi didn't know how he lifted the mermaid from the ground. He only remembered that her body was cold as dew on tender skin, heavy as if she carried not just a life within her, but an unnamed curse. Her golden tail slid over his shoulder like a living stream, glinting with faint rays in the early fog. It was not just a part of her body, it was a legacy. Ancient, sacred, dangerous. He stepped over roots, thorns, sharp stones. Each step sank deep into the mud, jarring his back, sending sharp pain up his neck. But he didn't slow down. Behind him, in the darkness, something followed. Not human, but a sound, the whistle of weapons, slicing through the air, the low growl of hunting dogs, and the hurried breaths from another realm. Ayira, still in his arms, made no sound, but her breath trembled lightly on Malachi's neck, like a breeze foretelling a storm. Despite her wounds, she maintained an uncanny calm. Only once did he hear her voice, not loud, not clear, just an echo from the water's surface. My name is Ayira. I am the daughter of Osun. Malachi didn't know who Osun was, but the way she spoke, it wasn't as if she were boasting of being a princess or a goddess. It was as if she were naming something this earth couldn't swallow. He nodded slightly, though no one saw. The path ahead was no longer a path. It was a series of life or death choices. Pushing through thickets of reeds tangled like a madman's hair, dodging hunters' net traps strung between trees, crawling over shallow streams where crocodiles lurked beneath rotting leaves. Malachi carried her like a secret yet to be told. Though the world kept asking him, why, he didn't stop. Another sound emerged, slow, heavy, dragging with each beat. Ahead, a dark shape slithered across the shallow stream, as if carving its own path. A python, its body as thick as a grown man's, its coppery skin glinting, its eyes half open like a creature that hadn't slept in 100 years. Malachi stopped. He had no weapon, no plan. He only stood, holding Ayira tighter, as if by doing so he could shield something not of this world from nature's savagery. And then, Ayira raised her head. She didn't scream. She didn't struggle. She only parted her lips, letting out a series of strange sounds. a song, ancient as clay, soft as falling water, yet resonant as a summons. Those sounds weren't meant for humans, and certainly not for explanation. The python lifted its head. It paused, its tongue flicking lightly in the air, as if tasting the song. One beat passed, then another. And then, slowly, as if time itself were hesitant, it turned and silently retreated into the darkness from which it came. Malachi asked nothing. He only bowed his head, grateful not to the gods, but to the girl whispering with her soul. They continued, no longer running, but walking steadily toward the edge of the forest where a small house lay hidden in the fog. No one lived there, except one person, Mama Osei, the last midwife of the swamp, the one with the third eye, whom children called the old woman who talks to tree shadows. No one came to Mama without a grave reason, for she didn't heal illnesses, she healed things medicine couldn't name. Mama's shack lay deep behind 3 intertwined Bodhi trees, like 3 generations of women bound by a vow. The only light came from a crack in the door, flickering as if eavesdropping on the spirits outside. Malachi stood before the door, breathing heavily. Not from exhaustion, but because he knew he was about to step into a place not meant for men. He knocked 3 times. No greeting, no name called, just 3 knocks slow, firm, like the beat of a funeral drum. The door opened. Do you believe there are houses that need no address, opening their doors only to the right person at the right moment? The wooden door creaked open with a sound like the whisper of an ancient forest, silently welcoming Malachi's steps into a space that didn't belong to reality. Inside, the dim glow of an oil lamp mingled with the scent of snake ash, dried leaves, herbs, and something else distant like the dust of time. The air was heavy, not with human breath, but with the weight of prayers spoken in that space across generations. Mama Osei sat there small, frail, her silver hair like burnt ash, but her eyes deep as an ancient well, as if they had seen through things even the gods kept hidden. She asked no questions, showed no surprise when Malachi laid a half-human, half-aquatic creature on the straw bed in the center of the shack. Her eyes only briefly glanced at Ayira's swollen belly, then lingered on Malachi's gaze, as if reading an unspoken message written in blood and fate. No questions, no judgment. Mama Osei simply stood, beginning the work of a mediator between worlds, not a doctor, not a sorceress, but a soul midwife. Malachi sat by the bed, his eyes fixed on Ayira, who trembled with pain. She didn't cry, she didn't complain, but her body convulsed in waves, like water sliced by a gust of wind. Sweat beaded on her forehead, blending with the light of the protective charms hanging around the shack, making her look like a sacred statue melting between 2 worlds. Mama Osei took dried snake ash, stored in a clay jar etched with ancient symbols, and sprinkled it around the bed in a circle, muttering ancient syllables under her breath. She placed a bowl of bitter leaf water at the foot of the bed, burning a few braided strands of forest vines tied with hair and owl feathers, a charm the swamp folk believed could deceive wandering spirits. Then she began to sing. Not a song humans sing to hear. It was a deep, low chant, rising from her bones, from beneath the earth where the departed still lived through memory. The melody thickened the air. No breeze entered. No sound from outside penetrated. Only life and death remained, vying for each breath. Malachi didn't know what he was doing there. He only knew his hands were gripping Ayira's cold, frail hands that, for the first time, made him tremble, not from fear, but from worry. A raw, pure worry, as if his soul were tethered to something he didn't understand but knew he couldn't lose. He gripped so tightly that blood began to seep from beneath his nails, but he didn't let go. Ayira closed her eyes, breathing rapidly. Her round belly moved, waves of contractions rippling through her body like a storm's roar, yet no cry of pain escaped her lips. Only her breath, hoarse and deep, like the sound of the sea echoing from 1,000 years ago. Mama Osei placed both hands on Ayira's belly. Her frail but steady hands were like the trunk of a tree. She didn't command, didn't rush. She only guided like a blind person leading another across a bridge between life and death. And then a small sound rang out. Not a cry, but a sharp, piercing wail, like lightning splitting a stormy night. The shack seemed to sway for a moment. The ground trembled lightly, as if a heart had gained a new vein. Ira opened her eyes. Malachi held his breath. Mama Osei smiled. A child. Its skin was jet black, smooth as the fresh mud of the rainy season. But its eyes extraordinary were emerald green, like the river at high tide, not an ordinary green, but a deep, slow, sacred light. The child didn't cry. It only opened its eyes, gazing into the void, as if recognizing the world from a place it had seen in a past life. And then a clap of thunder rolled, not fierce, not threatening, but like a knock from the heavens, proclaiming to the earth a preordained truth. The child of two worlds has been born. Malachi looked at the child, his throat tight. He didn't know if he was gazing at a creature or a miracle. But the one thing he knew for certain, from that moment, he was no longer alone. Can you guess what happens next? Take a moment to relax, comment 1, or I'm still here to keep listening. Sometimes the bonds that tie people together are not forged by blood, nor by love, but by things that cannot be named a promise, a glance, a moment when the universe seems to close one path to open another. Ayira could not return to the river immediately. The pain of childbirth had drained her, as if her very spirit had been wrung out. Her radiant golden-scaled skin was now pale, her shimmering tail too weak to glide through water. Each movement was as if she carried the weight of a silent ocean's memories on her back. Mama Osei said, "The girl needs to rest, not for days, but for moons." Malachi said nothing. He silently tidied his small shack on the edge of the swamp, once a refuge for an outcast, now a home for 3 unlikely souls. A man rejected by humanity, a mermaid bearing the spirit of the god Olson, and a child with deep river-green eyes and skin as black as night's mud. That little shack, in its silence, began to breathe again. Ayira rested on a bed now lined with cloths Malachi had begged from distant villages. Nearby, Obasi, the name Malachi, gave the child slept in a basket woven from forest vines, cushioned with soft leaves and a few owl feathers, gifted by Mama Osei. The name Obasi meant divine child, not because the boy held extraordinary power, but because Malachi believed every child born was a miracle, deserving of a name spoken with reverence. At first, there was a distance between Malachi and Ayira, not from estrangement, but because both were learning how to exist not alone. They spoke little. But each gesture, each glance, each time Malachi warmed water for Ayira to wash, each morning she softly sang to her child in the breeze through the straw roof, slowly wove them together, like 2 stones smoothed by the same current. They did not love each other as lovers. There were no hesitant touches of sweethearts, no whispered words under moonlight. But between them grew a quiet, pure bond like 2 people weathering a storm together, keeping a fire alive when the world outside was cold. Ayira rarely spoke, but one night, when the fog draped the swamp in white, when Obasi was asleep and Malachi was patching the torn roof, she spoke softly. Her voice was no longer resonant like waves, but light as mist. "You risked your life for me. I cannot return and leave my child to grow without a father. Please, raise him with me until I am strong enough to go back." Malachi didn't answer immediately, but the next morning, he brought back a small hammock. He hung it between 2 posts in the shack. Then he went fishing not to trade for his own meal, but for a family. From that day, no one asked what the other would do. Everything became routine. Malachi lit the fire. Ayira cleaned his wounds. Malachi told stories of the human world. Aira taught him ancient river songs. They lived not as husband and wife, but as two people safeguarding a life that both heaven and earth watched over. Obasi grew quickly. Those deep green eyes followed his foster father's every step. The boy laughed when Malachi played the flute, cried at night when his mother's river-tongue lullabies were absent. Each morning, Malachi lifted him high, showing him the sky. Each evening, Ayira bathed him in a basin, as if reminding his soul of its origins. Time passed, quietly but steadily. The little shack was no longer a fugitive's hideout. It had become a home not in society's eyes, but in the eyes of the universe. No one visited them, but no one needed to. They didn't live to be seen. They lived so that one day, that child would see himself. Do you believe that some families are not born of flesh and blood, but built from a promise and a heart that refuses to turn away? Not all storms come from the sky. Some storms begin with a whisper. And in the small village of Tin Hollow, where Malachi was once cast out like a stain to be erased, that storm began with the emerald green eyes of a child. Rumors spread faster than kitchen smoke. At first, it was whispers around the market. Has anyone seen Malachi's shack? There's a woman in there. But not like the women here. Then came nighttime tales. That woman has no legs. When it rains, the water around his house glows. Then the name Obasi began appearing in the dreams of barren mothers, of children who cried at night. Some swore they saw a green shimmer from the shack at the swamp's edge, where Malachi had lived in seclusion for years. And then a tempest rose. No one in the village could forget that night. Black clouds rolled in from the river, gusts howling like the grievances of ancient generations. Rain fell like stones, tearing roofs, uprooting ancient trees, shattering field edges, sweeping away livestock and water troughs. Villagers fled in chaos, hiding behind frail wooden walls, reciting prayers, calling to ancestors, but nothing could stop the fury of heaven and earth. And yet, when the storm passed amid the wreckage of torn roofs, knee-deep mud, and tear-drained cries, people noticed one place stood untouched: Malachi's shack. Not a single stone was displaced, not a branch broken. The lamp inside still burned, its smoke curling, as if no wind had ever passed through. The first to come was an old woman who had lost her newborn grandchild, trembling as she asked, "Could it be, is Obasi a spirit child? Can he speak to the departed?" Then came a man who had coughed through 3 rainy seasons, a woman who had lost 3 children in childbirth, a boy who hadn't slept for 5 nights straight. They came, one by one, not because they believed, but because they had lost faith in everything else. Malachi didn't turn anyone away. He didn't claim to have miracles. But he let them in, showed them the herbal water Ayira had taught him to brew, applied salves from forest seeds Mama Osei had once used. He didn't heal sickness, he only shared what he had learned from the 2 women who believed he was not a criminal. Obasi didn't speak, but whenever someone wept, the boy would step closer, lightly touching their hand, his green eyes wide open, not judging, not pitying, just a mirror for people to see themselves in. And strangely, fevers cooled, coughs quieted, nightmares faded. The villagers began to whisper again. But not about Malachi's past, about the wonder of a man once seen as a demon now becoming a refuge. They no longer asked why he had been imprisoned, but, "Can you make more of that medicine for my daughter?" They no longer saw him as a convict, but as someone holding on to something sacred that Tin Hollow had long forgotten. One night, the village chief came, not with a staff, not with shackles, but with his wife who had been ill for nearly a year, untreatable by anyone. He didn't apologize. But when Malachi brewed the herbal water and applied it to her forehead, the chief sat there, silent, like a guardian of a past slowly being cleansed by steam and patience. The next day, the whole village knew. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. Malachi was no longer the condemned man. He had become the village's man. Ayira, still living quietly behind the shack, didn't step forward, but the villagers left flowers under the window, placed stones carved with blessings, and hand-woven strings of shells. They didn't need to know where she came from. They only needed to know she was the mother of the child who had changed a community. Malachi remained the same. He played his flute each evening, fetched water each morning, but this time, he didn't carry water just to trade for dried fish. He carried water because the village was thirsty not for water, but for a chance to start anew. Some nights don't need thunder to make hearts tremble. That blood-red moon night was one such night when the moonlight didn't gently spill over the thatched roof, but stained the entire swamp with a hue of blood, like a warning from a distant realm. The Yazoo River rose unnaturally high, flooding over roots that generations had never seen submerged. The wind didn't blow, but the water was restless. Small whirlpools swirled up like undercurrents of a rising wrath. Ayira jolted awake from her sleep, cold sweat beading on her forehead like frost in summer. No questions were needed, no explanations given, just one look, and Malachi understood. Something beyond human power was about to unfold. Ayira's golden eyes peered into the darkness as if searching for a figure from her past, now returning with the spears of divinity. "My father knows," she whispered, her voice breaking like shattered glass. "Ursun, the god of deep rivers and dreams, knows where his child lives. He wants to take him back." Malachi grasped her hand, but Ayira only shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the water. Obasi, in his sleep, began to sing. Not the babbling of a child, but an ancient, crisp sound, resonant like the beat of forest drums, in a language only those with divine blood could recall. The boy didn't wake, but his hands moved lightly as if guiding the water, and from beneath the bed, small fish began to gather one by one, in layers, as if drawn by an irresistible force. Malachi trembled. Not from fear, but from the feeling of losing control for the first time over the child he had loved with everything but blood. He knew from that moment the true trial had begun. And then she came. A blind woman, her white hair reaching her waist, wrapped in cloth dyed with river ash, stepped onto the shore as if the water dared not wet her feet. No one knew where she came from, only that the wind changed direction as she passed, and the village fires flickered out, leaving only the red moonlight casting its glow on Malachi's shack. She stood before the door, neither knocking nor calling, but her voice rang out not from her mouth, but as if echoing from the earth, resonating in the heart of everyone who heard. "I am Sun, who shed blood to create rivers, who spoke the first call to form my son's soul. That child does not belong to the earth. He is water held captive in a clay jar. Return him to his source." Ayira bowed her head, not daring to look at her, but Malachi stood, unarmed, unshielded, without soothing words. He stepped forward, not to challenge a god, but because of an unspoken promise he had made that if life chose him to keep its flame, he would not let it be extinguished, even if he had to burn with it. "You are his father," Malachi said, his voice hoarse with trembling. "But I witnessed the blood when he was born. I caught his first cries. I held him when he was afraid. I bore pain to teach him to walk. I didn't give him life, but I carried him through sweat, through blood, through tears." He looked straight into the woman's clouded white eyes, neither flinching nor retreating. "If you want him back, kill me first." Silence. Not a breeze stirred, not a cricket chirped. The world held its breath. The blind woman raised her hand, a withered, sinewy hand, and placed it on Malachi's forehead. A faint green light pulsed from her palm, like water gliding over his skin, seeping into his memories, reading every sleepless night, every lullaby, every moment he played the flute to soothe the child to sleep. Not a word was spoken, but she saw a love that needed no name, a duty that asked for no reward, a devotion even gods could not command. Obasi woke, not crying. The boy stepped forward, looking at the blind woman. Green eyes met white eyes between the one who created and the one who nurtured. He didn't choose. He only walked to Malachi, took his hand, then turned to take Ayira's bridging two worlds with a simple, pure gesture, unbiased, unafraid. The woman withdrew her hand. She said nothing. But the river's waters receded, the wind stilled, and the moonlight lost its red hue. She turned, walking back toward the water where the river parted slowly, like the grand gates of a kingdom. Before vanishing, she turned her head not to look, but to acknowledge. Not every ending is a door closing. Some endings, like the first dawn after a stormy night, are the prelude to something grander, quieter, and more sacred than any dream dared to imagine. After the blood-red moon night, everything returned to an eerie calm. But no one in that small shack was the same anymore. Ayira, the daughter of the river god, sat by the water's edge from dawn to dusk, neither speaking, nor smiling, nor singing. Malachi chopped wood like a man trying to count the cracks of time, as if keeping his hands busy could stop his heart from falling, and Obasi, with his emerald green eyes, had learned to watch in silence. He was no longer just a child who smiled, cried, or ran about. That night had given him something, not power, but the weight of choice. 3 days later, when the moon returned to a slender crescent, Ayira approached Malachi. She didn't cry. She simply sat beside him, the man who had carried her through mud, traps, blood, rain, and the edge of life and death, and placed a hand, cold as night water, on his. No words were needed, but her eyes said it all. It's time. They walked to the riverbank, where the willows swayed as if calling out to memories. Mama Osei was already there, her clouded eyes seeing beyond what was yet to come. She didn't intervene. She only tied a string of shells around Obasi's wrist, a protection, a greeting, and a mark that would never fade, no matter where the waters carried him. Ayira knelt, not before Malachi, but before the river. The water before her shimmered with a golden glow like honeyed wine, then swirled gently as if an old father's hand were stroking his daughter's hair. She whispered something in Yoruba, ancient, sacred, reverent. An apology, a thank you, and a final plea from a daughter asking her father to judge not with power but with mercy. And then the river shuddered. From the heart of the water, a figure emerged, not the blind woman, but a translucent mist shaped like a tall man, his hair like a cascade, his eyes like abysses, his gaze both tender and pained, yet unable to let go. O son, the river. God didn't step onto the shore or open his arms to his kin. He simply stood, a presence like a gash in reality. Malachi stepped forward, once again with nothing in his hands, not to obstruct but to prove. He placed a hand on Obasi's shoulder and bowed his head. Not as one defeated, but as one entrusting his entire life to something greater than fate, trust. Ursun spoke little, but he listened. He looked at Ayira, then at the child, and his voice deep, resonant, distant, as if echoing from the depths of the Ganges whispered, "You did not give him life, but you kindled a fire in his heart. That is something even gods cannot teach." He turned to Ayira, his daughter, born from the silver-crested waves under a full moon. Let the child live between two worlds. One day, when the blood of gods and the heart of man merge as one, he will return, not to choose, but to lead. Then all soon dissolved into the water. No sound, no farewell. But the river grew still, as if it had never raged, never roared, only a calm surface remained, like a father's final embrace, knowing he must let go, for love is no longer possession. Ayira stayed one more night. The next morning, before the fog lifted, she left a seashell in Obasi's hand, a bracelet woven from her hair for Malachi, and stepped into the river. She didn't look back. She didn't cry, for she knew if she turned to look, she could never leave. Malachi and Obasi stood on the bank. Neither spoke, but a small hand gripped a calloused finger tightly, and that was enough. Years later, Obasi grew. His green eyes never changed, but in them was the peace of water and the strength of fire. He became a man of both earth and river's call. The villagers called him the child of the covenant, not because a god chose him, but because he was kept by a man who loved him more than life itself. What would you think if someone not bound to you by blood chose to stay when the whole world walked away? And so the story closes. Like a lake after the rain, no ripples remain, but beneath the water's depths, countless things continue to stir in silence. Obasi grew up by the riverbank, straddling two worlds carrying the heart of a man, but blood poured from a god. Ayira had returned to the deep waters, but her eyes lingered in every dream of her son. And Malachi, the man once forsaken by the world, became the anchor for a destiny greater than his own life. This story may have ended, but so much remains unspoken. What will happen when Obasi is old enough to hear the river's call? Can a human heart defy the fate of a god? And when a world demands back what it once entrusted, who will stand to protect what is right? We've seen that love can transcend blood, that you don't need to give birth to someone to be their father. And sometimes, miracles don't come from the heavens, but from steadfast resolve, from unwavering faith in one who once fell. If this story has touched a part of you, if you've ever loved someone so deeply you'd sacrifice your entire life, leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever been a Malachi in someone's life? And if you want to know what happens when Obasi returns to the river, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share this story, and let me know if you want a part 2. Because sometimes the untold is what keeps us watching.